in Africa related to this drug that I think you'll enjoy.
It's not just the Western world that has the scientific know-how to beat the virus. In Senegal, a laboratory has used its AIDS and Ebola experience to develop a $1 COVID-19 testing kit. Al Jazeera's Nicholas Hawk has more.
Senegal is doing what most countries can't, testing everyone, symptoms or not, entering a health center for the novel coronavirus. It has no shortage of testing kit thanks to this lab at the Institut Pasteur. Researchers are developing a $1 quick diagnostic kit, originally made to test for dengue fever. Patients drop blood or saliva onto the devices and wait for a bloodline to appear, like a pregnancy test, explains researcher Amadou Sall.
There is no need for a highly equipped lab. It's a simple test that can be done anywhere. The idea is to rapidly produce 2 to 4 million kits, not just for us, but for African countries, so that we can detect and isolate patients quickly.
The sick are administered a cheap anti-malarial drug called chloroquine, commonly found in sub-Saharan Africa where malaria is endemic. With only 50 ventilator machines for 16 million people, Senegalese engineers are using a 3D printing machine to produce more. While imported ventilators cost $16,000, this one is just $60. Senegal is counting the cost, and it's paying off. More than a month into the outbreak, the small West African nation suffered only 2 deaths, with most patients treated healed. Senegal has the largest rate of recovery in patients infected with the coronavirus in Africa, the 3rd in the world, ahead of countries like the United States and France. And while it has a tiny health budget compared to those countries, it has a wealth of experience in dealing with infectious diseases and outbreaks.
Amazing, isn't it? Inexpensive, great success rate. Put your comments down below.
I understand the logic behind social distancing, but this is starting to get out of hand. Paddleboarder chased by boat arrested in Malibu. Basketball hoops and tennis courts are starting to get taken down all across the country. Banning people from buying seeds to grow their own food in certain supermarkets. I thought this was a joke or maybe fake news out of context pictures, but I looked into it. Pushing too far, Michigan governor criticized for aggressive social distancing orders.
What I'm about to tell you is going to be banned, most likely on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Twitter and YouTube and every place else because it goes against the WHO. But 3 weeks ago, I called for a full audit of the WHO. At this point, you know about their assisted cover-up with the overlords of the Chinese Communist Party to try to hide the fact that China is directly responsible for the coronavirus pandemic. President Trump has rightly halted all U.S. funding to the WHO until we can find out what the heck is going on over there. Who's involved? How deep is this? I don't see the media asking any questions of any kind of substance. After Trump cut funding, the head of the WHO accused the president of politicizing the coronavirus. But the media, as usual, refuses to look into the political relationship between the head director, Tedros, of the WHO and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, let me give you a quick recap of what we were able to find just a few weeks ago. All of it I revealed on Blaze TV. If you're a subscriber, it can still be found on demand. It's really important. Tedros is the first WHO director to not have a medical degree. He's actually an Ethiopian politician. Now, I could be nice and start with he was the Ethiopian Minister of Health, but that's not where he was lately, and I'm going to get back to his posting as the Minister of Health here in a second. But his last job was with the Ethiopian government. He was their Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was basically their Mike Pompeo. He was also the chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union. It is widely reported now that China has an intense connection with the past couple of decades with Africa, very specifically in Ethiopia, which has been dubbed China's dream in Africa. So exactly 1 year ago this month, Ethiopia hosted its second Belt and Road Summit. Now, Belt and Road is China's strategy to dominate all international trade. Apple and Samsung used to be the most popular phone companies in Ethiopia until China moved in. Now it's the Chinese phone maker Tecno. The Chinese presence in Ethiopia is staggering, and we went through it on Blaze TV. The Chinese construction companies are building structures all over the country. They fully funded a $47 million rail system and over 30,000 miles of roads. They proved 70% of the funds for another railroad that links Ethiopia to neighboring countries at a cost of $3.4 billion. The Chinese investment in Ethiopia is growing at a rate of 52% a year, still growing. That's a high price tag. How is Ethiopia ever going to pay that back? Well, the answer is they can't in cash. Since the year 2000, Ethiopia owes China over $12 billion. That's half of their entire external debt owed to the Chinese Communist Party. They have no way of ever repaying it, at least not with cash. No one in the media will ask these questions. And making even more ridiculous this whole situation is the fact that China has a track record for buying influence in international organizations within the UN. An official within the White House recently told Radio Free Asia that China's foreign investment in places like Ethiopia and Africa is part of a plan to, quote, reshape the international system to accommodate its political and economic interests. They go on. Quote, in service of this strategy, China has consistently sought to trade financial incentives for votes, offering bribes and canceling debt for countries that support them. Now, the Washington Post recently reported that China forgave Cameroon's debt just 1 month before they withdrew their country's candidate to head the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. China also threatened to cut off exports from multiple countries in South America if they didn't back their candidate to head the FAO. Guess who now sits at the head of that UN organization? Yes, the distinguished gentleman from China. So why is it suddenly out of bounds to notice the same mafia-style tactics from China directed at the WHO? In 2017, the WHO director shocked the world when he announced that he was naming President Mugabe of Zimbabwe a WHO Goodwill Ambassador. Mugabe, as in the ruthless, human rights abusing, land grabbing, hyperinflation inducing dictator. Oh, and you can also tack Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist to that impressive resume. So why the heck did the WHO, more importantly, their director, think this was even a remotely good idea? Well, it all makes sense. If you see that China loved themselves some Mugabe, he was helping China move into Africa. They had strong ideological ties. Marx, Mao, Lenin, the current president, Xi Jinping, and Mugabe, all of them together. That's one heck of a party. The Washington Post reported that the WHO director's decision to honor Mugabe was speculated as, quote, a payoff to China, which worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help Tedros defeat the United Kingdom's candidate for the WHO job, David Nabarro. Tedros' victory was also a victory for Beijing, whose leader, Xi Jinping, has made public his goal of flexing China's muscle around the world. Really? This is the guy that everyone in the world, including our media, is claiming is acting in good faith when he covers up for China over the coronavirus. Not only did China have a deep ideological link with Mugabe in Zimbabwe, they also have a deep ideological link to the WHO director himself. Again, you won't get this information anywhere. What do I mean by that? Well, the government that he used to serve in Ethiopia are Marxist-Leninists. In fact, he wasn't just part of it. He's a member of and served both as health minister and foreign minister in the Ethiopian Tigray People's Liberation Front. Oh, I love them liberation fronts. It's a radical socialist movement that was so violent that they were officially designated a terror group. Some of their highlights include forced displacements and land seizures, torture, which include, and I'd like to quote here, prisoners were raped, tied to trees, held with animals, had water bottles hung from their genitals and their fingernails pulled out, and a slew of other human rights abuses. But that's what you get from Marxist revolutionaries. I know what you shouldn't expect. You shouldn't expect one of their members to become the director of the WHO. But what do you know? China saw a friend in both Tedros and his Marxist government buddies. They probably saw talent they could use when Tedros was allegedly caught covering up epidemics when he was the Minister of Health. I told you I would get back to that. Outbreaks of cholera were instead classified under him as, quote, acute watery diarrhea, despite the fact that outside experts tested stool samples and, lo and behold, it was cholera. He said it wasn't. The Washington Post reported back in 2016 that certain European officials were lobbying hard to keep the words cholera and Ethiopia out of any conversation. Sure. Well, this kind of talent could be used by China. He appeared to have experience covering up epidemics. And he not only a member of Cover-Up, he also is a Marxist who is tied into a Marxist Leninist terrorist political party. Wow. He was actually one of the 9 executive members of the Politburo, so he knows how China works. As Ethiopia's foreign minister, he helped China move into his country. In fact, let me quote a Facebook post from him. This is something that he posted in 2015. Under the Go Global program of China, we expect increased Chinese investment flow to Ethiopia. The 8 industrial parks identified throughout Ethiopia, some already under construction, will facilitate the migration of Chinese companies to Ethiopia. He even wrote an op-ed with his Chinese counterpart, one from 2014, entitled A Role Model for Bilateral Ties. This particular article was published in the Chinese Daily, a publication that is owned in its entirety by the Chinese Communist Party. More specifically, the publicity department, otherwise known as the propaganda arm of the Communist Party. Now, all of this should be on the front page of every American and Western investigative news outlet in the world. The head of the WHO, who comes from a radical Marxist political party that was dubbed a terrorist organization, who covered up outbreaks when he was the Minister of Health in his own country, was helped into office by the Chinese government, and has been caught doing favors for China. Now he's been caught doing exactly the same thing with coronavirus. That's the story. The facts are clear. The WHO director is in with communist China. We must stop listening to the WHO until they clean this mess up. Not a dime should go to them or, quite frankly, the UN until this is fixed. And then after that, we should still think about it. By the way, every word that I said is documented. Go ahead, throttle us, demonetize, remove this from Facebook, remove this from YouTube, throttle us, Google. You will only expose what you are really doing and who you are in bed with.
Thing happened yesterday that seals the deal for me, because over the last week or two, we've started to see the numbers kind of, they've simmered down. We're at 45,000 deaths instead of 2 million deaths. New York City is starting to see the curve get flattened. They're opening the beaches in Florida. They're opening the hair salons and the bowling alleys and the tattoo parlors in Georgia. Las Vegas wants to reopen. People are starting to make plans for June and July. We're starting to see more testing. We're starting to see that we're not running out of ventilators and that we're not running out of hospital beds, and that we can kind of seem to put, we can manage this, and that we should really start talking about opening America back up. And that's something that scares the hell out of the deep state, because they like keeping people in poverty. They like taking power over people. They like telling people you can't go to the gun store and buy a gun. You can't speak out. You can't even push your kid in a swing without fear of getting arrested. They like to have the power and the control and the money. The money, the control that they get by writing you a check for $1,200 by saying you can't work, but you know what we're going to do since we're great? We're going to give you $1,200. And then, you know what? If you continue not to work and you just stay home and let us have control over you, we're then going to give you $2,000 a month until we say it's over. America is not standing for that. Americans are taking control. They want their country back. They want to go back to work, and it's going to happen. Donald Trump is out there planning